Thank you, Justice Donnelly, for meeting with me today. The OFP and all of our members really appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your background and what's bringing you back to the Supreme Court race.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Mike Donnelly, and I'm proud to have served on the Ohio Supreme Court since 2019 after being elected in 2018. Prior to that, I was a trial court judge in Cuyahoga County, Ohio for 14 years, a job I absolutely loved. I loved bringing the process of conflict in people's lives to resolution and being part of that process. 9 of those years were the most rewarding because I served as a mental health court judge. 25% of my criminal defendants on that docket suffered from schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or developmentally disabled individuals. I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to keep the vast majority of those people out of the prison system where they often go in and become abused and mistreated and come out worse than before, and keep the community safe at the same time. So it taught me that there are better ways of doing things than the status quo. In Prior to that, I was in civil litigation. I represented insurance companies and injured workers prior to that. And then I started my career as an assistant prosecutor. Prior to joining the bench, I saw this criminal and civil justice system from all sides, and it prepared me well for the bench. And the reason I ran for the Supreme Court in 2018, 14 years went by in the blink of an eye, and I thought that if I could gain a seat on the High Court, I could use my voice to advocate for reforms that I believe are necessary in both the criminal and civil justice system to provide people with maximum transparency, maximum efficiency, maximum fairness, and access to justice. So
Thank
that's
you
why.
for sharing. What would you say is your judicial philosophy?
My judicial philosophy, um, to follow the law as written. A lot of people during these election times like to make accusations that judges tend to judges shouldn't legislate from the bench, and I wholeheartedly believe in that. America is built on the concept that we're always going to have disagreements about policy matters, but when policies become law, uh, the agreement is that we follow the law and we apply the law to the facts of the case. And so that's what I tried to do when I was fortunate to gain a seat on the Ohio Supreme Court. I let my clerks know, hey, we all have biases as human beings. There might be a certain result that I would like in this particular case, but the law is the law. And so I never want to be accused of result oriented analysis. And so that's how I try to keep consistent and follow the law. If I believe that the law is unjust or renders an unjust injustice to a particular segment of society, I will say that in a concurring opinion and urge the legislature to change the law or consider updating the law. But my oath is to the law. Unfortunately, in Ohio right now, for the first time, I'm going to have to run with a party label affiliated with my name. And as I've told crowds of Democrats why I'm happy for their endorsement and happy for their support, I'm also happy for the fact that they understand that I don't have an allegiance to any political party. My allegiance is solely to follow the laws of the state of Ohio, the Ohio Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution. That's what people expect from me as a judge on the bench.
Thank you.
Sure.
With the country experiencing polarizing factions and an increase in partisanship, how can the court system be a model to promote civil discourse?
I would answer that question by saying we should eliminate partisanship from judicial elections altogether. For about 100 years, we elected our judges in partisan primaries, and then we would have nonpartisan general elections. And then the legislature just changed that and then made the general election partisan, not for all judges, but just the Supreme Court and the appellate court. And I think the reasons is clear. And even this was opposed by the Ohio Judicial Conference and the Ohio State Bar Association, that who firmly believe, as I do, that ship should be out of the judiciary altogether. I would like to see us move towards, if we're going to retain an elected system of just judges, that it be totally nonpartisan. And even as some other states um, have retention elections, so judges don't have to raise money from every and from lawyers and different factions and special interest groups. That creates the appearance of impropriety, and then that there would still be a mechanism to remove a judge that wasn't performing their job well or was abusing the office, and the people could take them out, but that they wouldn't have to constantly run, especially running under um, partisan label. I was very proud of the fact that I went over 75 counties, many of them rural, predominantly Republican uh, communities in 2018, and I think my messaging back then was clear. People want fairness. We're referees basically. We apply the rules of society that we agreed to live by, and it shouldn't be a Republican or a Democratic issue. They want fairness, they want consistency, and they want proportionality in our outcomes.
Thank you for sharing. What would you say has been your most difficult case and how did you handle that?
Well, as a trial court judge, I have many difficult cases involving very tragic circumstances, and of course, making the decision to incarcerate people is very serious, and I took that job of sentencing very seriously, and judges' duties to keep the community safe. Um, but when I arrived at the Ohio Supreme Court, one of the first court cases that I was called upon to review was a case called State v. Gwynn, and that involved a woman 54 years old, who was not had no criminal record to speak of, but she was going around and stealing items of property from various senior citizens in nursing homes, and these were items that traditional thieves don't take for resale value on the street. They were odd items, family pictures, trinkets, things like this. But she was stealing nonetheless, and people were very upset, um, and not unreasonably so, when this took place. But she was charged with 35 felony burglary counts. And she was at her plea hearing. The judge went over every possibility that could come under our sentencing laws, uh, concurrent prison sentences, consecutive prison sentences, but several times she was told she might be eligible for probation. The state was silent about what they intended to advocate for at sentencing. So Ms. Gwynn entered her plea, and then 30 days later, she showed up at her sentencing hearing. And for the first time, she learned that the state was going to ask for 42 years in prison. And her defense lawyer was asking for probation. And the judge said, "You're both wrong." And she found out she received a 65-year sentence. So she found out on her sentencing date that she wasn't going home on probation as she hoped, that she was going to die in prison because she'd have to reach the age of 120. This case set alarm bells off. Number one, the facts suggested that Ms. Gwynn, to me, as a mental health court judge, probably suffered from some form of mental illness. But uh, next, equally important in that case are these wide discretionary guardrails that exist for trial court judges in the state. And we don't collect data in order to keep those sentences. Judges are mandated by Ohio law to treat similarly situated defendants with similar sentences, regardless of such irrelevant factors like the color of their skin or their socioeconomic place in society. But we don't collect, like they do in the federal system, data that people would keep uh, and give judges discretionary information that would allow them to carry out that mandate of treating similarly situated defendants with similar sentences. So Gwynn has been back and forth, up and down from the appellate court since that original case, but I have recused myself from any further litigation on that case because I have gone out and tried to uh, to sound the alarm bells throughout the state of Ohio about the state of Ohio sentencing. Sentences are all over the board. And when people believe, as they do in Ohio, that your sentencing outcome is more likely uh, related to the individual proclivities of your sentencing judge, that you find out who you receive at your arraignment, rather than the rule of law, which requires proportionality and fairness, then people start to lose confidence in their courts. So this has been one of the reforms that I've been advocating for, and probably been the most vocal in the state of Ohio to collect this data, just as they do, as your members know, in the medical profession. I mean, would I think if you asked a reasonable citizen, would you rather be treated by a doctor who retired 10 years ago, or would you rather be treated by a doctor who is up on all the latest data on which drugs do this, what are the side effects? I mean, data and information help guide uh, the decision makers in the medical profession. Why wouldn't it we collect the same data for the important decisions that we make in the legal profession?
Thank you. Can you describe one instance where you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved it?
Yes, well, um, transparency and ethics is very important to me. And when I started my career as a prosecutor, I did not question the the way most criminal cases get resolved in the criminal justice system. Most cases in our trial courts do not go to trial. They are resolved through negotiated plea bargains. And the judges in Ohio, unlike their federal counterparts in the federal system, get involved in these discussions. And plea bargaining remains a mystery with a large segment of the public, and there's good reason for that. And that's because these plea bargains usually get formulated and forged in backroom discussions with the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense lawyer, but no court reporter is there. And so when I became a judge, I began to view this practice of having these off the record discussions from a totally different light. And I thought that there was a problem with this, because I came to the conclusion that I call the greatest epiphany of my career, and that is that no one, including the judge, should ever say anything in one of those backroom discussions that they would not repeat verbatim out the on the record. So one day I changed the way I practice, and I was the only judge in Cuyahoga County who did things this way. I didn't do any off the record discussions. Everything took place on the record. That way, the defendant, whose life could be profoundly affected by what's being discussed, could could hear, and if there's a victim in the case, they could hear that. And I believe that judges should all do this. If they're going to involve themselves in the plea negotiation practice, this is the way it should be done, because it's transparency. And that if I make a representation on the record that induces someone into a plea bargain, and 30 days down the road, I'm in a bad mood or I forgot what I said, there's a record that I can be reminded of what I said at the time. So I believe that transparency is very important. I led an effort in this state to stop what I call factually baseless pleas. That's when the prosecutor charges someone with, it usually happens in felony court in sexual assault cases. People are charged with rape or other forms of sexual assault. Then a backroom discussion usually takes place, and in some cases, judges are allowing the defendants charged with these crimes to plead to charges that in no way resemble what the original charge is. And they are outcomes that could not be produced at a jury trial. I believe it's wrong, because it's feeding bad information into the system. The only truth you can glean from these types of arrangements is that either a guilty person is not being held accountable for a sexual assault that they committed, or someone who was falsely accused is being coerced into a plea to plead to something that they didn't do, in order to resolve the case. And downstream users of our criminal justice system, uh, employers in the state who do background checks, future sentencing judges, police who are doing investigations, they need to rely on the information that comes out of our criminal justice system to be based in truth and based in fact in order for the system to run correctly and to have public confidence in it. So I've been leading the effort to ban these factually baseless pleas, but I equally am concerned about reforms on the about wrongful conviction and people who are innocent who are convicted. They sometimes have to fight for decades in order to just get a hearing to demonstrate what they believe is new evidence that would undermine the theory of guilt that was used to convict them. And it shouldn't have to be that way. Sometimes they have to get celebrity involvement. The system is very non-transparent when it comes to innocent people who are convicted, and I want to change that.
Thank you. Lastly, what are your beliefs on volunteering and community service being a necessary commitment for persons holding office? And what types of volunteering and community service have you been involved in?
I believe public officials, as leaders in the community, it's absolutely essential that you get involved in efforts, nonprofit efforts. I I'm a very big supporter of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland that provides free representation to the less advantaged people of Northeast Ohio who need legal representation. So a lot of people may be surprised that in my downtime, I play guitar and perform in a band called Faith and Whiskey. Our motto is, if you don't have one, you better have the other. And we play 80s one hit wonders and classic rock. And we primarily play at benefits. So we just played at the Jam for Justice in Cleveland. We helped Legal Aid raise $750,000 or something like that. So that's how I give back. I was a board member on the Cleveland Baseball Federation that helped raise money to provide inner city kids with free baseball, boys and girls, and softball, free of charge with umpires and uniforms. For many years, I sat on that board. I was involved in the Western Reserve Fire Museum that was designed to teach safety about fire to school children. And right now, I'm sitting on the board of Chagrin Arts, which is trying to raise public awareness about the problem about wrongful conviction and through the arts. And so I'm heavily involved in that right now. But I believe it's absolutely essential for public officials to get involved and exercise leadership skills in improving the community.
Well, thank you so much, Justice Donnelly. The OFP and all of our members really appreciate your time and you being willing to sit down and let our members know a little bit about you and what you stand for.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Welcome, Judge Shanahan. We at the OFP really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this interview. It allows our members such a unique opportunity to get to know you and what is important to you. If you would not mind sharing a little bit about your background and what is bringing you to the Supreme Court race.
Sure, and thank you for having me. It's important that the groups like this learn about us. It's an odd situation to be in for the judicial races because so many folks don't know us. They don't understand what brought us here or what our backgrounds are. We always like to say they're not the sexy races, like the Senate and whatnot, but they're very important. So I do appreciate you and your organization recognizing that. So I am currently a common pleas court judge in Hamilton County down in Cincinnati. I've been on the common pleas bench for the last 9 years. And in that capacity, I handle I'm a general division judge. So any case that you can go to prison for from capital murder on down, and then any civil action valued at more than $15,000. Prior to that, I was a municipal court judge for 4 years, handling all misdemeanors that you would go to the local justice center for and any civil case valued at less than $15,000. And then before that, for 11 years, I was a practicing attorney as a county prosecutor First in Butler County, I spent 1 year in the appellate division and then moved over to the common pleas division, which is where I am now. And I was there for 4 years. And then in 2005, I was invited down to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office in the same capacity as a felony level prosecutor. Within 2 years of moving down to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, I was also made a supervisor overseeing 4 felony room prosecutors and handling all of the large cases for the office. So that's sort of my legal background, personal background. I'm the youngest of 8 kids, born and raised by a single mother from a working class family. I went to Kent State and got my undergraduate degree there, and then on to the University of Cincinnati for law school.
Thank you for sharing. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your judicial philosophy?
Sure. I am an originalist, and what that means is that the words are what they are. They mean exactly what they say. Frankly, as a judge, this job requires a great deal of restraint because we are guided by the Constitution and by the statutes. And I have taken an oath, and I feel very firmly about the interpretation of the Constitution and the statutes to mean exactly what it says.
Thank you. With the country experiencing polarizing political factions and an increase in partisanship, how can the court system be a model to promote civil discourse?
I think leading by example is the best way to model any behavior, whether that be for your children or for your coworkers or as a civil servant to our community. And the most important thing for a judge is to stay in the lane of travel. We have 3 co-equal branches of government, and where we run into problems and where people will tend to lose faith is particularly with the judiciary when the judges step out of the lane of travel and they start legislating from the bench. When you start saying, well, sure, the legislature passed this law, but I think they really probably intended for this to happen, so I'm going to decide the case based on what I believe should be the outcome. That's where the public starts losing its confidence. When the judiciary starts questioning the executive branch and their decision, that starts to erode confidence in our system. Frankly, if all 3 co-equal branches would stay in their lane of travel, we wouldn't have this problem with the eroding confidence in our system.
Thank you for sharing. What would you say has been your most difficult case, and how did you handle that?
In 2015, a University of Cincinnati police officer shot and killed an unarmed African-American man here in Cincinnati. The case was mine. The officer was charged with murder. And the case itself, the subject matter was not difficult. I've done a multitude of murder cases as both a prosecutor and as a judge. What became incredibly difficult was the nationwide attention that was brought on that case. The media really interjected itself into every single day of the trial. It caused a great deal of controversy and delay. They were demanding that I provide juror questionnaires. These are things that although the law isn't exactly clear on, it's obvious that we have a duty to those folks who come down here because we've subpoenaed them to be jurors to protect their identity. And I had every intention of doing that. So I was sued by the media. That was the difficulty when you're dealing with national attention and external forces interjecting themselves into a very important criminal case, very important for the parties, for the victim's family, for the defendant, for law enforcement in general, for the community of Hamilton County. And so managing that day in and day out was an interesting task. I felt that I did it with grace. I did it with clarity. I tried to make sure that everybody had their opportunity to be heard. I provided a great deal of access to the media, to our courtroom. I provided external rooms for them to set up, and for folks who couldn't fit in our courtroom because of fire capacity, we provided rooms down the hallway for them to watch live stream while the case went on. That's not something you normally deal with as a judge. I went to great lengths, to accommodate both the media and the general public to make sure that we had an open courtroom that folks who wanted to participate and observe could be provided access. But it created an entire other layer on top of doing a murder trial. I think that I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm very proud of the way that I handled that. I'm very proud of ensuring that the jurors were kept safe and that the defendant was provided a very fair trial, and that the victims were well represented by the state of Ohio. Although the state doesn't, the victims aren't their clients. They were watching and had their interest at heart. And I think that everybody involved in that case, truly involved, not externally involved, felt like the case was tried very cleanly.
Thank you. Can you describe one instance where you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved that?
Yes. When I was a county prosecutor here in Hamilton County, we had obviously constant contact with local law enforcement. In one particular case, I was presenting the case to the grand jury, and in normal fashion, I was preparing the witnesses ahead of time before we went in to testify. And so I was talking with the detective, and he was a well-known detective here in town. I took him into a side room to talk to him about what exactly led up to the case, what the background was. And during that conversation, he shared with me quite proudly that he had locked up a juvenile in our juvenile detention system because the juvenile's mother, he felt, had information about this crime and that she was not cooperating. So he charged this child with being involved in the crime and locked him up, knowing full well the child was not involved, and that he just was trying to get cooperation from the mother. I was so stunned at that moment. And so I very calmly made sure I understood what he did. And he very proudly said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Well, where is he now?" The juvenile, figuring it was he locked him up overnight. "Oh, he's still sitting in the Juvenile Justice Center." This had been 8-10 days later. And I was incensed, to say the least. So you're faced with this ethical dilemma because, our law enforcement is held to this high standard, and they should live to this high standard. And we assume that they are. And then I have this law enforcement officer essentially bragging to me that he used these completely illegal tactics to get cooperation from witnesses in this crime. I immediately had the juvenile released that very same day. I immediately reported it to the local law enforcement. We recorded, our investigators in the prosecutor's office recorded an interview with this police officer, and he was charged criminally. And I had to testify in court against this police officer. There's the notion that there's going to be backlash. You're a prosecutor and you're testifying against a police officer. And I did not care. I was so disgusted with his behavior and how unethical it was. There was no hesitation in my decision to make sure that he was prosecuted for his behavior, and I followed through with that.
Thank you for sharing. Lastly, what are your beliefs on volunteering and community service being a commitment for persons holding public office? And what types of volunteering and community service have you been involved in?
I think that everybody in our community should volunteer to the best of their ability. Not everybody is able, but we all should be willing. We are all Americans. We are all Ohioans, and I love this country. Part of our success as a country is because of the volunteer efforts, because people are willing to step up and help others in need. So as a parent, I am constantly called upon. Most of my volunteering these days are at my children's school and through our church. I have a 7-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. So there's always, sports, school activities, but also we're very active in our parish and volunteer there. Prior to that, I was on the board. I served on the board of a shelter for women with their children who were fleeing violence and also struggling with substance abuse. I've volunteered at the pregnancy center here in town over the years. So most of my volunteer work now is because of the age of my children. It is at my kids' school and at our church. I do think it's very important, but I don't think it's just important for our civic leaders. I think it's important for our entire community to get involved. You have to have ownership in the betterment of your community.
Thank you again for meeting with us, Judge Shanahan. The OFP really, really appreciates you. And all of our members find, so much, they get so much out of these interviews and being able to hear from you and what matters to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.